Welcome to Betrayal Trauma Recovery, BTR.org. I'm Anne. I'm sure you remember what it was like when you were searching for help, maybe for your husband, hoping to find the right program or therapist. That's why I started podcasting. I supported my husband through 7 years of pornography addiction recovery, and not one therapist during that time told me I was experiencing emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion. I didn't want any other woman on the planet to be in the dark. If you're like the majority of my listeners, you're experiencing the type of abuse that's invisible and difficult to wrap your head around. Your husband is using porn or having affairs or lying to you, and you're getting the same bad advice about how to improve communication or your relationship. If you need support from women who totally understand, check out our daily group session schedule at btr.org/group. We'd love to see you in a session today. One simple, anonymous way to help spread the word is to click, follow, or subscribe to the Betrayal Trauma Recovery podcast. While you're there, every 5-star rating helps make this podcast more visible and will help save other women from getting the wrong kind of help, like a couple program that will make this type of abuse worse. For those of you who follow or subscribe to this podcast, thank you so much. Your support means so much to me. Kathleen, a member of our community, is on today's podcast. I recorded this episode a few years ago. Before we get to that, here's a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. She said, "It's life-giving to know you'll be believed when no one else will believe you. You're not crazy. This podcast and the BTR group sessions are giving me strength. I will forever be grateful. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast by following the podcast and by giving this review." All right, Kathleen, I'm so grateful that you're here and you're bravely sharing your story to help other women. It helps all of us feel heard. If you're interested in sharing your story, please contact my assistant at podcast@btr.org. She'll set up an interview. I love hearing all of your stories. Kathleen, why don't you start with your backstory? What was your situation?
I guess from day one of my marriage, I felt like something just wasn't right. And I could never put my finger on it. We were, I thought, happily married, had a child, and then shortly after my second child was born, I just had a feeling that something wasn't right. And I found out, unfortunately, that my husband was into pornography. And that was just devastating. I felt like everything was over. Although I didn't want to end the marriage, I felt like my perfect world with my newer marriage, my 2 sweet children, our sweet little family was just ruined. It just was not what I thought it was. And we immediately tried to get help. He, unfortunately, was lying to me about the cause of his use of pornography. He blamed it on my pregnancy with my first and second child. I later found out that he was addicted to porn since he was a child. So it just, for years, went on, him dabbling in help. And I just kept with it, trying to stay strong, trying to stay in the marriage. I never even really thought about leaving the marriage. We kept going, and we had our good times and then our bad times. And when things were bad, they were very bad. Things were good sometimes, but it was really not much to hold on to. So we went on like this for probably 14, 15 years. Until we started to get help together. And through working with them over about a 2-year period, I started to see that my husband just did not want to do the work to get better. So, which then made us pretty much come to a halt. We were separated about 2 summers ago for 3 months. He was able to come back, and about 2 months after that, he was out for good. And since then, I've been blamed for everything.
Let's talk about those years of thinking he has a porn addiction and going down that route for a little while. Did you ever consider that you were dealing with an emotional and psychological abuser?
I had no idea.
And did anyone ever mention it to you? Like, he's using porn? Have you ever considered that he's abusive?
No, never. If anything, it was the opposite. It was, let's help him. Let's see what we could do to help him.
Or he's such a good guy. We can't understand why he's doing this thing. let's get him some help.
Absolutely. Yeah, or his past, he had a rough upbringing, so this is why he's doing it.
Right. Yeah. I often say I know several people who have had a really super hard upbringing and they're not abusers. So it's not really a reason to be abusive. He went for years to a well known Catholic counselor and men's purity groups. Um, do you feel like they really understand the abusive nature of this for the victims?
Absolutely not. We started off with this one counselor that was the well-known Catholic counselor in the porn expertise. And I started to feel like I was about to be blamed in this situation, and I just bailed quickly. Something in my gut told me, get away. So then last year or so, I heard that he might have changed the way he was helping women and couples. So I decided, let me give it another try. It was at least 15 years later. And unfortunately, it was just the same thing. So it was one session and done. So no, there's no change. And it's a very unfortunate because these seem to be the people we turn to when you have a problem. And it just causes more trauma for the women.
Right. What are some of the things that the priests said to you or did that was so traumatizing that ended up blaming you?
In my parish,
Hmm.
yeah, so I actually was being supported by my parish priest.
When you mean support, when you say supported, do you mean financially?
Not financially. There's really no financial support. It was just an emotional support. He listened, he understood. He was the one who suggested I might have to have a separation with my husband, which I took that very seriously. And maybe 4 months later, we were separated. And I guess after my husband went and talked to the pastor and the parish priest, both decided to take sides with him, which I don't even know why a side had to be taken.
I can tell you why.
Go ahead.
A side does need to be taken. A neutral party will always benefit the perpetrator. The problem is, most of the time, they side with the perpetrator instead of the victim. Because in an abuse situation, there's a perpetrator and a victim. So if you stay neutral and say, well, she's got her side of the story and he has his side of the story, and the truth is somewhere in the middle, that means that you believe what he is saying a little bit. And maybe she's lying a little bit rather than recognizing, no, this is a perpetrator who's going to do everything he can to avoid accountability and blame his victim, and a victim who's telling the truth, who's trying to get to safety. So it's really important for people to take sides, but they need to take sides with the right party. They need to protect the victim. Any type of neutrality or even thinking, well, he couldn't be that bad is really harmful to the victim.
Right. And that's a lot of what I've been experiencing. He's been getting into the ear of anybody who knew us and telling them how horrible I have been. Getting back to the priest was the one who was spreading that I was a liar and I have manipulated the entire situation. And anybody in the situation that I was in would have taken the advice of him to get help, which I don't even know what help he was talking about.
People don't understand that an abuser claiming that his victim is the abuser is abuse.
Absolutely.
So this abuse has not only extended to him lying to everybody about you and blaming you, but also roping third party people like a priest in your parish or other people to also abuse you through blaming you.
That's exactly what's happening now. And I can honestly say that this secondary abuse is way worse than what I experienced directly from my husband.
Mm-hmm. Why would you say that is? I agree with you. I've experienced it as well. And I agree. But for our listeners, in your opinion, why do you think that is? Real quick, there are a lot of so-called betrayal trauma therapists or coaches or groups out there, but they don't approach pornography use or infidelity as an abuse issue. Or they try to quote unquote treat both the abuser and the victim in the same setting, which is unethical. BTR group sessions are different. We get it. We never victim blame, and we're here to support you. So if you hear something in this episode you relate to, check out our BTR group session schedule at btr.org/group. We'd love to see you in a group session today. Now back to our conversation.
Well, I think first of all, it's my own healthy pride, I guess. Just I want to be an upstanding Christian and a good person. And now people see me as a liar and a manipulator, which I'm not. The other part of it is that I've lost my community. I had to leave my church and go to a different church. And it's very hard because I feel like a lot of people look down their nose at me, and I just try to hold my head high and have faith in God to get me through.
So when did you realize that all of these years of something's not quite right and he's got this porn issue, when did you realize that was just flat out emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion?
I always knew that it wasn't right. I knew it wasn't healthy, but I didn't realize it was abuse until after our second separation. I actually was just surfing the internet one night looking at abuse and decided to call our local abuse shelter. And I called and said, I don't know if I'm being abused. And from the information that I gave them about what had happened to me, they assured me that I was absolutely being abused. And they also helped me to see that other behaviors that had happened in our marriage were abuse that I didn't even realize was wrong. I mean, I've been emotionally, psychologically, financially, and even physically. I didn't even realize I was being physically abused.
Did that shock you? Because you'd never called an abuse specialist before, right? You'd always called maybe a marriage counselor or some type of clergy or some kind of pornography addiction specialist. So were you shocked that immediately, right out of the gate, these people who had never talked to you before were like, yeah, this is super abusive, and that you'd never heard it from anyone else?
I was, and I felt it was such a disadvantage going through this. It was always focusing on his porn addiction. And I was always searching for porn addiction for spouses to help for that. And I couldn't find anything. And it was mind boggling and maddening to know that there was nothing out there, especially with the growing numbers of pornography abuse. The only thing I could find for women was that sometimes women abuse porn as well. But that wasn't my situation. I was somebody being mistreated in a marriage where pornography was used. And that was part of it. I never really wanted to go to marriage counseling. For some reason, I knew in my gut it was not a marriage issue. I knew it was his porn issue and his problem. So I was grateful for that. But it was really hard to find help.
When did you find BTR?
I think I found it probably about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. Just happened to find BTR online and saw that there was a podcast and religiously started to listen because it was the only place that really got it.
What did you think after years of the help him, be gentle with him because he has these childhood problems? Let's try not to trigger him. Don't shame him. Are you a good wife? Are you giving him sex when he needs it? What did you think after coming to BTR and listening? What did that feel like for you?
I just felt like there was a place that understood what it really was. And I knew that it was the right place to be to get the information that I needed to educate myself.
It's like you know it in your gut, but you don't have words for it. You don't have a place to process it appropriately. Because if you try to process it with the pornography addiction people and they tell you, no, it's you and you need to be patient, then it halts your processing. It stops you. It's like floating around, but you can't ever grab it. It's like foggy and you can't quite get out of that fog.
Right. I always knew, I always had the gut feeling, and I would thankfully go with my gut feeling, but I could never put my finger on where things were going wrong. I mean, I never caught him using porn again. And I always was asking myself with the question is he using or is he not? He claims sobriety, but based on what I know now and looking back, I know he was still using. I know he was because I know the way he behaved. I knew the way that he kept me at a distance. He wouldn't engage with me at all emotionally, which devastated me. It was like I was a stranger in our house, but outside he acted like husband of the year. He would bring me coffee in front of other people. He would act like he was just so in love when he was with me in public, which is part of the reason why people just don't understand the situation and they believe him that I'm the liar and the manipulator.
When you changed your outward talk from he's a porn addict to he's abusive, did the third party people get more angry with you? Or are they like, whoa, wait a minute. You've said he's a porn addict. Now you're claiming he's an abuser? Did they get more upset?
Well, not really, because nobody knew he was a porn user. That was kept secret. It was my own private secret that I lived in. My family didn't know. Our friends didn't know. Nobody knew. I didn't tell people. I was very much ashamed that that was in our marriage.
Okay. Did you start telling people when you recognized it was abuse? Did you start saying he's abusive?
Once we were separated for the second time and it was pretty much out there that we were no longer together, yes, I was telling people that he had abused pornography and that he was abusive. And I was trying to get myself to safety.
How did that go over with safe people? I guess it went over well if they're safe. Sorry, that's a stupid question.
Absolutely. My family has been so supportive, tremendously supportive, even more than I even thought that they could be. And I've had friends that I wasn't that close with, but they understood because of their own experiences through their life that they became like a rock to me. But then a lot of people that I thought I could count on just disappeared or sided with him.
Mhm. Yeah, I've seen that happen too. It's really interesting. Even a couple of friends that we had that her husband is also a porn user have decided to side with my ex. They're still married, so I wonder if they think, well, if we talk to Anne, she's so intent on calling this abuse, maybe our marriage would be in jeopardy. So we don't really want to go down that route. I'm not sure why they've decided to do that, but he's still exhibiting abusive behaviors from my perspective. But of course, they can't see that. So I'm like, why would you want to be friends with an abuser? That makes no sense to me.
Right.
And also, I think we can clearly see that they're lying and manipulating people, but they can't see it.
No. And, there is a part of me that has a little sympathy for the third party people. I believed my husband's lies for years. I mean, my whole relationship was based on lies.
Yep. And if we couldn't see it, they don't even live with him. So, of course, it would be hard for them to see it too.
Right. He's good at lying.
Good at manipulation, good at grooming, really.
Absolutely.
So, a lot of women who are hoping that their relationship is going to work out and hoping that once he's confronted about his abusive behaviors, that he can get into some type of program and get help. And if they go down the pornography addiction recovery route, many CSATs do what is known as a full disclosure, where the abuser is supposed to outline all of his sexual indiscretions, but doesn't necessarily include all abuse episodes. Since you went down that route for a little while, did you ever have a quote unquote full disclosure with the help of a pornography addiction specialist?
No, unfortunately, I did not. Anything that I found out about my husband was either me finding out by catching him or him over the years basically drip feeding me information and I would figure things out.
Mm. You say unfortunately. Is that something that you think would have helped you, or why did you say unfortunately?
I say unfortunately because without any truth, there is no basis for your relationship. And I never received truth. That's part of the reason or a main reason why my marriage fell apart. But if he was truthful with me, I feel like maybe we could have fixed things and worked on it better.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people get a full disclosure, but it's not a full disclosure. So there are times where they claim to have told the whole truth, but it's not the full truth. And that fake full truth is very difficult for victims because they think, oh, finally, we have the whole truth, but they don't. The other thing I think is interesting is fake histories that they might give as excuses. So I am not about to say that your husband wasn't actually abused, but some of them do say things like that as an excuse. For example, I know of one abuser who told his victim that he was sexually abused by a neighbor, but she is now 100% convinced that he was the one that sexually abused the neighbor.
I believe there could be some truth to that. I always took what my husband told me with a grain of salt, but being that he said he was abused, I took it seriously just to protect my children.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's one thing that's difficult to know when you're dealing with an abusive and manipulative man who is willing to lie at all costs, is the truth that you think you know might not even be the truth at all. And a full disclosure might not even be a full disclosure. So I want to give women who are like, man, I wish I could have gotten a full disclosure. I wish he would have told me the truth. Let them know that if someone does not want to tell you the full truth, they might pretend to give it to you, and that might be just as harmful as not knowing anything. If there's no way on earth, and I literally mean on earth, like perhaps after we die, God will help us know exactly what the truth is. But when we're dealing with someone who lies at this scale, what worries me is the fake truth that women think that they receive. And then they feel safe because they feel like they've received it all when it's just the tip of the iceberg.
That's the good point. And I think that with my husband, the way he is, nothing that ever came out of his mouth to me was truthful. Early on, I did pray to God to let me know what I needed to know. And I guess I should just be grateful that I know what I know, and that's all I need to know.
Isn't that interesting? So, as a woman of faith who decided to divorce, can we talk about your decision to divorce, or are you divorced?
Not officially. I actually separated from my husband with the intent for him to go get help. Through that time, he chose to go live with his suspected abuser, or at least who he claims abused him. He went to live with him for over a year. It was his brother.
His brother. Okay. So, he chooses to go live with the person who he has told you abused him.
Yes, which was a huge red flag to me because he claimed this, but then went to live with him. And then he decided about a year ago that he wanted to file for divorce.
That sounds really similar to my story, by the way. My ex claimed that he had been abused by his parents and that his parents were really abusive, but just like hangs out with them all the time without saying that their behaviors have changed. There is no like, oh, they're totally different now.
Right now, I'm really struggling with the community thing. It's really tough to live in a community of people. It's even where I work. The school that I teach at is where my children attend, and it's part of a small Catholic community. So there I am working amongst people who think I'm the liar and the manipulator and the marriage ruiner. So it's tough.
That is really, really hard. I'm very sorry. I've prayed often that the truth will be made known to people somehow. There are days, do you ever do this where you read the local newspaper thinking that you'll see him in the newspaper? Do you ever do that?
I feel like someday I'm going to hear that he has like either a DUI or was arrested or something.
Yeah.
It's at a local high school. So always worried about that as well.
Mm-hmm. It's so strange to think that someone who has not taken any accountability is still just walking around and not only just walking around, but affecting your life at such a level when you are the victim of his abuse without people really acknowledging or being compassionate or empathetic about your situation. Instead, being more judgmental, it feels more isolating.
Right. Yeah, it does. And then you get your wishy washy people who say, I don't want to choose a side.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably one of the worst things you can say to somebody who's been abused because it's like, I don't take you seriously.
Yeah, I don't believe you. I confront people about that. I would not recommend it, by the way. But I say you need to pick a side because I'm a victim of abuse and he is a perpetrator. So, would you like to stand with a victim and stop enabling a perpetrator or not?
Right.
And they don't like that one bit. People feel very uncomfortable about that. And then they think, oh, she really is crazy.
It's amazing how their crazy look makes us look more crazy.
Instead of thinking, oh, they don't like us, or they don't like what we say about abuse, or they think we're going too far when we call these guys abusers. I think it's more strategic to have a surprised posture in your head. You don't want to like insult people. Like, oh, that's surprising to me. I didn't know that you were brought here from 1830 in a time machine and that you didn't know abusers do this and that what you're saying is an extension of his abuse. Huh. Well, weird. I mean, it's more strategic to have attitude or an energy about us that is more surprise than traumatized. And it's impossible to not be traumatized when someone says something triggery that's obviously harmful, that's not empathetic or not caring at all. It's impossible not to be hurt by that. But I wonder if we all took this, I'm shocked. Like I had a therapist write and say, I don't agree with BTR's model. I don't think it's abusive. So I can't be associated with you. And my first email to him back was like, I'm so sorry. That makes sense. I wish you the best. And then I thought, wait a minute, I'm not going to write this. I'm going to write, oh, I'm really surprised to hear that you don't think that lying and manipulation are emotional and psychological abuse. And that's what I wrote. And he wrote back and said, oh, I do recognize that they're abuse. I just don't agree with what BTR says. And I'm like, He said, I don't think porn use is abusive, is what he said. And this is a very prominent CSAT therapist out there.
Wow.
Who said, I just don't think porn use is abuse. And I was like, okay, whatever.
That leads me to believe, well, what's going on in your world? Why are you defending it?
Yeah, why would anyone think that viewing someone being abused isn't participating in abuse in some way? Or at the very least, sending your sexual energy somewhere other than your wife. What do you want to call that if you don't want to call it abuse?
I call that infidelity.
Infidelity is also abusive, right? Why are you so afraid of the word abuse?
I guess because it's so strong and so many people think of it as hitting their wife. It's so just extreme to call something abuse. And I think that's part of the problem. People need to be educated on it.
What you went through is extreme. So to say that it's too extreme to call it abuse, you went through years of psychological and emotional abuse and sexual coercion, and you are still a victim of abuse in your community from a perpetrator who is talking to your community about you and lying about you. If you don't call that extreme, what is? In terms of the way it affects you on a daily basis, that is extreme. It's abuse. There's no other word for it.
Right. And he's still able to be in contact with me, unfortunately, because of our children, which leaves the door open for him to continue to abuse me.
Exactly. You do your best to set boundaries. You do your best to heal, all those things that are healthy. It's not impossible. You will live an amazing life and things will get better for you over time. But they don't understand that there's no way to stop him from abusing you.
Right. It's a shame because our judicial system and even co-parent counseling, they just don't understand. And it's difficult because the boundaries that you set up are then having to be torn down or changed because you have to follow
the parenting plan or something. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the parenting plan or some kind of legal plan.
Have you ever talked to the legal system or your attorney about being emotionally and psychologically abused and you need a parallel parenting plan?
He is very well aware. We just started a second co-parent counseling, and I do want to ask if we could do a parallel parenting plan.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation and it's ongoing. Divorce doesn't stop the abuse. It can protect us from a lot of things, but it can't stop the abuse outright. So that's what's really difficult. And so many victims now are praying and praying and praying for justice all over the world. It feels like we pray and pray and pray and that our prayers aren't being answered.
It's kind of like any relationship. There's times I feel like God is right by my side, and that's what gets me through the day. And then there are times that I'm asking, Lord, where are you? I don't feel you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard. I always have faith in our Lord. I know He is there, but to feel Him just makes it so much more doable to get through the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tough. I couldn't do it without my faith. I couldn't do it without God. And I'm grateful for that. But it's hard. And I too pray for truth. I'm like, Lord, I need truth to come out soon. I need it soon. So hasn't been answered yet, but I know that God is always working in mysterious ways. I'm just living in hope that it will come out at some point.
Yeah, I had a discussion with God the other day where he was like, I answer so many of your prayers. You just don't notice because you're focused on these other ones, kind of like that. And I was like, but I don't care about those other ones. These are the ones I want you to answer. Answer them now. Why are you not answering them? I'm so mad at you. It is frustrating to feel like he helped me with this thing and he helped me with that thing, but why can't he help me so I don't have to have any more contact with my abuser, which is a really big thing.
Right. That's one of my prayers as well. And I find it going to like sinful thoughts sometimes, which I try not to do, but
Like him getting hit by a bus?
totally be an prayer answer. It also, to me, would be protection for my children because they are abused as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I wonder about all those Old Testament stories of the wicked being just smitten. I don't know. But I know that the best we can do if we're women of faith is to be obedient to the commandments and do the best we can under a very difficult situation.
Right. And hopefully in God's time, it will all come out.
If you could go back in time and share with your younger self anything, what would you tell her?
I guess to go with your gut feeling. And if you are doubting anything, just don't second guess it. Just look into it a little bit more and be sure of who you marry and spend the rest of your life with.
It's interesting, though, if you don't know what you're looking for, you could spend time with them and not see it because we all spent years with our abuser and we didn't recognize we were being abused.
Right. And that is what happened. And I had some odd dreams that happened and I pretty much ignored them, which I wish I didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know.
Yeah, when you have no context for it, it's difficult to see. That's one of the goals of BTR is to educate women all over the world about abuse, about what it looks like so that we can educate our children. So if they have a dream, they have a context for what they're experiencing.
Right. Yeah, hopefully it'll be easier for my children down the road.
Kathleen, thank you so much for being brave and sharing your story.
And thank you for the opportunity to share my story. It's definitely helpful to know there are other women out there that understand, and I'm not alone in this.
You are not. There are lots of us. So welcome to the club no one ever wanted to be a part of.
Right. Thanks for the welcome.
If this podcast is helpful to you, please help us reach other women by following or subscribing and giving us a 5-star rating. Thank you for helping other women find us. If you've already purchased a copy of my book, Trauma Mama, Husband Drama, please circle back and give it a 5-star rating. A lot of women are searching for books about betrayal trauma on Amazon, and rating Trauma Mama will help them find this podcast, which is free to everyone. Your donations keep this podcast going. Go to our website, btr.org, scroll to the bottom, click on Support the BTR Podcast. And until next week, stay safe out there.